Hello, in this video we'll be going over all of the interactions that Cassidy's magnetic grenade has with different heroes and what abilities they lose. Because there are some very strange interactions and there's not really any rules, it's very inconsistent what abilities do get cancelled and which ones don't. So starting with supports, we have Ana, who doesn't have any interactions at all because she has no movement abilities to lose. Next up we have Baptiste, and Baptiste does not lose access to his exo boots. So Baptiste crouch jump, he can still do that even when he is stuck with Cassidy's magnetic grenade. Brigitte loses access to her shield bass, even though it's not really a conventional movement ability. I'm guessing it's still just included. Kiriko, of course, loses her swift step, and she also loses her ability to wall climb as well. Next we have Lifeweaver, who he loses his dash, but he does not lose his pedal platform. So if he gets stuck, he can still place a platform underneath himself and try and get to safety. Lucio kind of gets completely destroyed. He loses his ability to wall ride. So if he gets stuck when he's on a wall above a cliff, he is plummeting to his death. But weirdly enough, he doesn't lose his ability to speed boost, and even amp it up works completely fine if he's on speed. Next up we have Mercy, and Mercy loses her passive ability to collide. So normally on Mercy, if you hold space, you'll be able to keep yourself afloat in the air and fall at a much slower speed. But when she is stuck, she loses that. She also loses Guardian Angel, but weirdly enough, she doesn't lose Valkyrie. She can still use her ultimate if she gets stuck, and she can even fly around with it even if she gets stuck while using it. So very inconsistent interaction there with some other characters we have coming up. Next up we have Moira, who just loses access to Fade, and then Zenyatta, who just loses nothing because he is a very static boy. Moving on to damage heroes, we have Ass, who loses nothing. She actually does not lose access to Coach Gun, even though I would say Coach Gun is more of a movement ability than Brigitte's Sealed Bass is. But whatever. The one interesting thing to note is that Bob will actually be completely stopped if he gets stuck with Cassidy's magnetic grenade. So you could use this to try and save your team from a Bob if you can maybe stop him before he's able to run into a good position. But you could also just as easily stop him in a place that's even better than where he was going to end up. So try that at your own risk. Next up we have Bastion, who actually doesn't lose anything. He can still use his grenade and grenade jump around with it while being stuck. Cassidy loses his roll, as expected. Echo is a very weird case. So first off, she loses her glide. So like Mercy, Echo can hold space to slowly glide down, and she loses access to that. But Echo's flight, her shift ability, interacts very weirdly with magnetic grenade. So if you get stuck before you use it, then you just can't use it. Now, if you get stuck after you've used it, but before the timer appears on screen, it will get cancelled. But if you get stuck after the timer appears on screen, then you can no longer fly around, but the timer will keep going. And once the grenade explodes and the hindered effect wears off, you can continue to fly for the remainder of the timer. So it's a very, very weird interaction here where it doesn't outright cancel the ability, but it cancels your ability to fly while using it. So it basically cancels it, but you can still fly around at the end if you have time remaining on it. It's very weird. Next we have Genji, of course. He loses Swift Strike, and he can still use his deflect to protect himself. However, in addition, he also loses his wall climb, like Kiriko does, and he also loses his double jump as well. Next up, we have Hanzo, who loses his little extra jump thing he has. I don't remember what it's called, but he also loses his ability to wall climb. Next up is Junkrat, who doesn't lose anything. He can still use Concussive Mine to jump around. And as a weird interaction, we decided to test Riptire, because Riptire can actually climb up walls, so because all of the other heroes that can climb walls lost their ability to climb up walls, we decided to test, well, can Riptire still climb walls? And the answer is yes, Riptire will still be able to climb up walls if it is stuck with Cassidy's magnetic grenade. So very weird case there. And it's not like it isn't affected by the grenade, it will actually have its movement speed slowed down just due to the slow applied by a magnetic grenade. It just doesn't lose wall climb for some reason. It's also very hard to hit because magnetic grenade doesn't actually home in on Tire like it does heroes. Next up we have Mei, who doesn't lose anything. After Mei we have Pharah. So Pharah loses her flight, so she can't use her boosters in the air by pressing space. She also loses her ability Jump Jet, but she doesn't lose Concussive Blast. So she can still use her Concussive Blast to kind of knock herself backwards if he's in a pinch after being stuck with magnetic grenade. Next up we have Reaper, and Reaper actually gets completely destroyed by magnetic grenade. Not only does he lose Shadow Step, but he also loses Wraith form as well, which Shadow Step I could maybe see because it gets you from one place to another, but it's more of a teleport than a like movement ability, like something like Blink where it's super agile. But on top of that, he also loses Wraith form as well, which just isn't a movement ability. So Reaper just kind of gets annihilated if he gets stuck. Next up we have Sojourn, and Sojourn loses access to her power slide. We try to check if she can't jump if she gets stuck. I'm assuming it cancels the ability if you get stuck mid use of it, but because of the homing on the grenade not being that good and how low to the ground Sojourn's hitbox is, we tried for a while and not once were we able to actually have the grenade stick her in the middle of her power slide. Next up we have Soldier 76, and he loses his ability to sprint. Next up is Sombra. She loses stealth and she also loses her translocator. And weirdly enough, translocator is completely disabled, so even if she doesn't have one set up to teleport to, she can't even throw a new one out if she is stuck. She just completely loses access to the ability altogether. Next up we have Symmetra, and Symmetra doesn't lose anything. She can still place down a teleporter when stuck and use it. Her whole kit works completely fine while stuck. Next up we have Torbjorn, who also loses nothing, which is kind of inconsistent with heroes like Soldier 76, because Torbjorn's overload gives him a speed boost, and something you'll see with a lot of heroes further on the list is that speed boosts seem to be allowed, but for some reason Soldier 76's sprint is disabled, but other abilities that increase your movement speed, like Lucio's speed aura, Torbjorn's overload, they are all allowed, so it's kind of a bit strange in that regard. However, next up we have Tracer, who loses Blink, which makes sense, but she also loses recall as well. So Tracer also gets kind of omega screwed by being stuck with magnetic grenade. And then lastly for DPS we have Widowmaker, who loses access to her grapple. And yes, getting stuck while using grapple will immediately cancel it mid-grapple. So next we're moving on to tanks, and we have Diva, who loses access to her boosters. And weirdly enough, it will even stop boosters when you're using self-destruct. So if you use boosters and then self-destruct to throw the mech out, if a Cassidy manages to snipe it with a magnetic grenade, the mech will just drop to the ground. It completely cancels all the momentum from boosters. Next up we have Doomfist, which is another character that gets completely screwed over by magnetic grenade because he loses punch, he loses his slam, he even loses his ultimate. You can't use ultimate while you're stuck with Cassidy's magnetic grenade. Because he goes intangible instantly, I don't think it's possible to, magnetic grenade him out of his ult so that it cancels and he loses it completely. But again, weird that he loses ult. I wish that his ult was immune to it, because I don't think a lot of people think of Doomfist's ultimate as a movement ability, but whatever, that's how it works right now. The one interesting thing to note is that if you're charging up punch, it will cancel punch if you get stuck. So if you have an empowered punch that you're charging up to use, if you get stuck and it just stops your charge, you will actually lose the empowered punch. So if you're charging up an empowered punch and you see a Cassidy throw a magnetic grenade at you, you may want to just manually cancel it by pressing left click so that you don't lose the empowered punch. Because if you manually cancel your punch while you're charging it, you don't lose your empowered punch at all. Next up we have Junker Queen, who only loses her ultimate. Commanding Shout is completely fine, she can still use that when stuck, she just can't use her ultimate. And being hit while using your ultimate will completely cancel it as well. Next up for tanks we have Orisa, who actually does not lose access to Javelin Spin. And I guess it's because it's also used to block damage, but it's still just weird that it doesn't get cancelled by it, because a lot of other abilities that have movement attached to them but aren't strictly used for movement are cancelled, but Javelin Spin, which lets her block damage and also move a lot faster, doesn't get cancelled. Again, it's just very weird. Ramatra is next, and he also doesn't lose anything from being stuck. Next up is Reinhardt, who can no longer charge if he gets stuck. You can also cancel him mid-charge if you manage to stick him with it. However, this is actually much harder than one would expect because of how the homing works and Reinhardt actually outspeeds the grenade if it starts tracking him. Next up, we have Roadhog, who does not lose anything at all. And then after that, we have Sigma, who weirdly enough does not lose anything. If you get stuck, you can still use your ultimate and you can still fly around even if you get stuck. Again, it's just weird that heroes like Doomfist do get their ult completely removed if they get stuck with Cassidy's magnetic grenade and they can't use it at all. And then Sigma can still use his ult when he gets stuck by Cassidy's magnetic grenade. Again, it's just very weird. Next up, we have Winston, and all he loses is he loses his ability to leap, as you would expect. Nothing else weird with him. But next up, we have Wrecking Ball. And Wrecking Ball is an absolute nightmare with how he works. So first up, he loses Pile Driver, and he loses his ability to use Grappling Hook. Both of these abilities will also be cancelled if he gets stuck while they are mid-use. In addition to that, he loses his ability to change from his Sooty Suit form to ball form. However, if he's already in ball form, being stuck doesn't force him out of ball form. He can still stay in ball form while stuck. In addition, even though visually the ability icon is disabled, if he gets stuck while he's in ball form, he can still change to normal form while he is stuck. Very weird, especially since on the HUD, it does say that the ability is disabled, but he can still do it. So yeah. And then moving on to a disappointing finale, we have Zarya, who does not lose anything because he has nothing to lose. And yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully I didn't miss any abilities or any weird interactions. If I did, just let me know in the comments so that other people can see it, and we can just have a nice, full, comprehensive list of every character that gets completely fucked over by this ability, so that we know which heroes' mains just have the right to be the most mad about these changes. So yeah, until next time, see ya.